Hey, everybody, it is Trags, Mike Petralia, back with another episode of the JungleRoar Podcast. And this time it is my sincere pleasure to welcome back Mike Niziolek of Cleveland.com, covering the Cincinnati Bengals and the National Football League for Cleveland.com. Mike, thanks for joining us back. How's your summer or your spring going so far?
Well, the summer starts today. The kids get out of school, so now things get real around the house. So it was a relaxing spring, but now it gets intense.
By the way, may I compliment you on your tremendous backdrop?
Thank you. I appreciate it. It took a minute to set up, but we're
yeah,
ready
I was going to
now.
ask you, how long?
A while. Yeah, it's a lot of stuff. So unpacking, during the season didn't work out, but we got it put together now. We're still tweaking things, but
it looks snazzy.
Thank you.
So
Thank you.
let me start with this general question, Mike.
Yes.
Your biggest impressions of the Bengals offseason so far, what are they?
Probably steady. I know some, been an A, B sort of grades you've seen around nationally. I think the thing has been, very little, Orlando Brown was kind of the surprise, but everything else was kind of just business as usual. Even the trade request that Jonah Williams made, it's not created a lot of drama. The Bengals said, essentially, we're going to keep him, and we like him at right tackle. That's where we're going to try to play him, and sort of moved forward. Even, stuff off the field with Joe Mixon, they've sort of just kept going, not let anything kind of hit their, trip them up, and, incorporate all these new players to the locker room. And you kind of hear every one of them say what a good atmosphere it is, what good chemistry this staff and this locker room has. And I just feel like whatever's been kind of thrown their way, they've just sort of absorbed it and moved on. Even sort of the change up in personnel at some spots. They don't seem flustered at all, and they seem to just be moving forward. Kind of like, I think Zach talks about, just, a championship quality team does these kind of things. You build that roster, and you kind of keep that culture moving forward, and that's sort of what they've done.
What impresses me about that, Mike, in what you just mentioned about the Joe Mixon situation, is the fact that you and me talk a lot in that locker room about how good the locker room is. And it was a real pleasure and a real great vibe to be a part of last year. And even, for myself, a year before that, coming back to Cincinnati. And what's really important, I think, to Zach and the coaching staff, and to the leaders in that locker room, is to maintain that vibe, not let it get disrupted too much. And I think, a couple of these curveballs could have disrupted things, and they haven't.
Yeah, like I said, I mentioned, Mixon and Jonah Williams, they haven't had a player disgruntled like that in a couple of years, where they've, kind of seeking an exit after a move they made. I thought it was a little weird that Williams' camp has sort of hinted that they didn't contact him. I thought they probably could have handled that differently and, give him a heads up, just so, I think that's an emotional thing. Ted Karras talked about that. It's sometimes hard to get past that, but ultimately, I think, they've got so many veterans and so many people that, the continuity they've had in staff and core to the roster, they can absorb those things. Just because, even though they let a Von Bell or Jesse Bates go, they still got a Mike Hilton in there, Chidobe Awuzie, all those linebackers. You have a lot of veteran presence that sort of, can kind of move you forward, and that's kind of what they've done.
Indeed. And I know I mentioned to you on Monday when we were talking about, or Tuesday when we were talking about doing this podcast, I want to address the wide receiver situation and how the Bengals have tried to stay ahead of the curve, and the fact that they're going to still try and sign their top two wide receivers, I think, in T. Higgins and Jamar Chase. The way the Bengals are handling this, I think, is pretty savvy. And I think, obviously in drafting somebody like Charlie Jones out of Purdue, that's clearly an eye toward the future, most likely with an eye towards replacing Tyler Boyd. But I think in trying to keep T. Higgins and Jamar Chase, that's a message to Joe Burrow that we want to give you as many weapons as possible. And Joe Burrow telling the organization, I'll do everything I can to make it happen.
Yeah, I've long held that, all three of them have to be coordinating a little bit to try to say, like, we want to move forward. What can we leave on the table? How do we structure these contracts a little bit to sort of accommodate each other? I don't think Joe Burrow can sort of ignore that. And he said at his press conference that he is not. He's conscious of it, because I think it's really hard when you kind of look at the numbers I mean, I kind of view it, you're going to need $100 million for 3 players, and that's a lot of money. So they're going to need to be creative with how they kind of structure things. I mean, there's only one team right now, the Arizona Cardinals, with spending more than $50 million on their receiver room. So you mentioned Tyler Boyd. Like, I think he's probably the guy that goes at that point, because you need to kind of keep the costs very, very much at a minimum beyond Higgins and Chase, but you still want talent. But it's still going to be expensive. Especially what does Chase do this season? I mean, could bump him up even more. But it's still a lot. So because $40 million is sort of like the expensive benchmark. I think it's what, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 teams are at 40 beyond Arizona. And Arizona has a lot invested in their receivers with DeAndre Hopkins, and they have an expensive quarterback, and the rest of their roster's a mess. So you can kind of see what happens if you don't do things right, how everything else can kind of fall apart around it when you've dedicated all those resources. So they have to be careful. And I think where you saw some of those moves in the draft, or a direct response to that, with defense heavy to try to replace some of the high priced veterans there, right. And then receiver, where because the room can't be $60 million room, you can't afford a Tyler Boyd at $10 million, $8 million. It's just not possible if you re-sign Higgins and Chase.
Obviously, I think a lot of fans are wondering whether or not Joe Burrow gets done first or the receivers get done first. I think it's pretty clear at this point the Bengals want to get the deal done with Joe Burrow so that they know what their financial situation is going forward.
Yeah, he's the biggest domino because he's the big, he'll make the most money. So you need to know how his contract's structured to do the rest, obviously. So I think that's sort of just how, it's the only way forward to do that, to see what you have left to offer a T. Higgins, to offer a Logan Wilson, if he was part of that group, and then obviously next year with Jamar.
The other thing that I think fans are very savvy to now is the fact that if you can stretch out Joe Burrow's contract longer terms, not just 4 years, maybe 5, 6, 7 years, something along that. I don't think they're going to get to the 10 years of Patrick Mahomes. I don't think the Burrow camp is going to go for that and spreading out the money that long. But the longer you spread out the money, the more beneficial it is for the team, correct?
Yeah, I mean, it seems like 5 years is going to be the standard now. I mean, that's what these recent Jalen Hurts, Lamar Jackson have signed. They sort of set the market. So I think, anything less than 5 would sort of surprise me. Anything more than maybe 6 would also surprise me. I think these agents want a second bite of it for themselves, but also for their player. Right. And Joe Burrow's young enough where that contract would be really big money. And as you've seen everything go up, you have to kind of bet that the market's going to keep going up. So, you'd want that. I think maybe there will be some come down to that, at some point these contracts are getting so exorbitant that you can't really build a roster around it. And what if one or two of these, like Russell Wilson is an example, where if he doesn't bounce back and it's just a complete miss, your whole team's sunk. It doesn't matter what else you do. So, but I mean, it's a good bet that the, cap will keep rising and you'll get more money in that second contract per year. So yeah, I think 5 to 6 is probably the answer, in terms of length, unless, they are on the same page and want to just do something crazy.
I think you and me are on the same wavelength that this deal doesn't get announced until the earliest, right before training camp, correct? I don't think this gets done before the team goes dark in early July.
Yeah, I mean, I think it would have been, in April when everybody's around if they had it done. But I mean, it just seemed like they, that was when sort of the initial stuff was happening with Duke, kind of at the combine saying, they had started. But after that, you kind of figured that they would wait until, when things picked up again, not when, people are out of town and things like that. I think that, now July is the likeliest sort of spot right before training camp. You give it a boost, everybody will be in town, and you try to, make some headlines with it.
Let's move on to the rookie class. And I don't know how many rookies you've had a chance to chat with, if you've had a chance to catch up with all of them. I think it's a pretty fascinating rookie class. And I think, maybe this is rose-colored glasses, looking at the Bengals through rose-colored glasses. But I get the impression that a significant percentage of these players in the rookie class are going to be able to make immediate contributions. Charlie Jones, certainly one of them. Miles Murphy, I think, is definitely, well, Lou Anarumo. I thought it would, raised my eyebrows a little bit when he said he's going to be in the defensive pass rushing rotation right away. Those kind of players and that kind of impact, I think the Bengals realize that you need your rookies to step in and be contributors right away.
Well, I think if the Bengals were on like a dating app, they'd have a type. Guys that went to, these colleges with championship pedigrees. You talk about Clemson, you talk about Alabama, Michigan, success, throughout their careers. Jordan Battle has literally only lost, I think, 7 games. I think I added it up, or no, not 7. I think it was like 13 games throughout his whole career. It was like 6 at Alabama and 7 in high school, or something ridiculous. In 8 years. So you kind of see that guys that know the game sort of in and out, film wise, study wise. They want these guys that have a veteran presence about them, but aren't veterans, right? Like you talk to Miles Murphy, and you kind of get the sense that at Clemson, they were using him in a lot of complex ways and doing a lot of different things with him because he could handle it. And even Chase Brown, who went to Illinois, is sort of a very similar attitude and demeanor as those guys, with not having gone to one of those sort of obviously high-end championship caliber programs. But they just all very similar. You talk to Jordan Battle, you talk to Chase Brown, you get the similar vibe. Miles Murphy, and I think that is why they feel like those guys can handle the moment on day one. And so I think that's what they were looking for in a lot of those guys. There's a couple exceptions, but for the most part, this class is like that.
Well, I think one of the reasons the Bengals are swiping right, to take your metaphor, on a lot of these rookies, especially in the defensive part of the class, is because those rookies have been exposed to so many different types of defensive calls and systems at what, be it Alabama, be it Michigan, with, obviously DJ Turner the second. He obviously played with Dax Hill, but he is someone who has played multiple defenses. Miles Murphy has talked about the multiple defensive fronts that he played in at Clemson. And then you have Jordan Battle, who played for one of certainly the most complex, intricate defensive systems in college football under Nick Saban. When you look at all 3 of those players and the fact that they've been asked to do so much in so many different positions on the field, I think that fits in with what Lou Anarumo wants.
Well, and Battle started, just a couple games into his career as a freshman. I mean, there's no bigger stamp of approval, right?
Correct.
He started all the games that year, but he started the game against LSU, against Burrow and Chase. I mean, there's no bigger sort of nod that this guy's probably ready for a lot than that. Not many people can say that they've had that role in Nick Saban's defense, for 4 years. So I think you see it. Pairing Dax Hill and DJ Turner up, you kind of get that chemistry. These guys are going to be a little comfortable together as they sort of grow together, because Dax Hill, I think this year is going to be a tough step up, and there's going to be a lot of expectations for him. So I mean, I think you can see the plan with what the type of player they want, and it's worked well for them. You could see the impact it has in the locker room, because all these guys fit in right away, and seems to add to the culture. Chase Brown talked about that on day one. He's like, I want to add to the culture, not just be a part of it, and which is impressive for a rookie. So I mean, you can kind of see just what the Bengals are looking for.
I also think the Bengals are going to be in a much better position in terms of depth this year than they were last year, not just on the offensive line, but in the defense, in the secondary as well. And don't forget about DJ Ivey. I know he's, a 7th rounder, and he was picked at the end of the draft. Very, very fast. And you can't replicate speed. Lou Anarumo has always said, give me speed and give me a guy who can tackle. I need those 2 things in a cornerback. And certainly I think in DJ Ivey, they have a guy that kind of fits that bill. It's really whether or not he can pick up the system, I think.
Yeah, I think they saw uses for everybody. I mean, I think they surprised people by taking that punter, Brad Robbins in the 6th round, but they see a guy that they want, and they have a plan for him in their mind, and they sort of stick to it. And so I think, once they drafted DJ Ivey, you kind of see what they're trying to do to establish depth at corner, find special teams contributors. You just kind of see that, I think that they're Duke Tobin's talked about the small staff that they have, and they've had it together for a long time. And I think that's where that comes from, that, they kind of develop a real sense for people and how to use them along with the coaching staff.
You mentioned special teams. That seems like a perfect segue to one of the final topics I want to address with Mike Niziolek of Cleveland.com, covering the Bengals and the National Football League. The changes to the kickoffs this year, and it's been rumored for many, many years now, for actually at least a decade, I'd say, going back to the early to mid 2010s, where there was a focus on, lessening the impact, literally, on kick coverage units around the National Football League, and limiting the injuries in general in football. And now, if you fair catch it, much like is the case in college football, if you fair catch it inside the 25, the ball gets spotted at the 25. What that tells me, Mike, is that unless there is a need for you to advance the ball in late game situations, beyond the 30, beyond the 40-yard line, then there's no need for you to really return the football. Just make sure you catch the football and don't fumble it.
Yeah, I mean, it's the goal is to take, to reduce I think the competition committee chair said yesterday, concussions on kickoff returns were at a 9-year high. And so, this push for the renewed push for the rule is based on sort of the data that they receive. It's obviously the highest sort of impact play of all football. So that's, the highest probability of a concussion happens on kickoffs. So, they're moving to sort of take it away. And I think this is going to, I looked yesterday, and I don't think the Bengals had a return in their first 4 games. And I don't think that's going to be. I think that's going to be commonplace now. I think that it'll be odd seeing a guy that has 5 returns in one game anymore. You're not going to see it, like you said, unless in the final 2 minutes you need a spark. You need to get to the end zone, and you only have 3 plays. That's one of them. You're going to take a chance at it. But other than that,
Right.
25-yard line, you just kind of go for it, because I mean it's going to be challenging to take it out of the end zone and get 25 consistently.
And I'm not saying this would have changed the Bengals' perspective on Charlie Jones, who Darren Simmons, I know, feels can be a special teams weapon, because I think Charlie Jones can also be a weapon as a punt returner. And certainly the punt returns are not going to change. You still are going to want to flip the field and lessen, the impact, or actually increase the impact offensively if you get a good return. And we obviously all saw in the AFC Championship what a good punt return can do on a low line drive punt. But I'm just curious how the Bengals might view Charlie Jones now with the special teams rules changing a little bit.
Well, Nick Scott said it. He was a guy that got to start returning kicks at Penn State. Hasn't he's been on kickoff coverage throughout his career, hasn't returned kicks, but it's going to cost people jobs. Not
Right.
Charlie Jones outright, but
No.
A guy like Shaka Hayward from Duke, a linebacker. What's his value if he can't cover kicks? Or there's no those guys are going to be more on the bubble than they would. But you're right. Charlie Jones, does he slip another round because he's not really gonna do what you think he could do? They really liked what he did at Iowa, returning kicks. Before he got to Purdue and really focused on receiver. They thought that was and that's an element of the game that they've been missing. But now, do they need it? So I think, my thing is, in 5 to 10 years, are we even going to have a kickoff play like it is now? I mean, if you reduce it so much, what's the point of even having it? I don't know what the next iteration will be, but at some point, we're getting to the point where, it's obvious they don't like the numbers of injuries on it. So I don't know what it all looks like. Obviously, special teams coordinators are concerned because it's a big part of what they do. It's a whole phase of the game almost. And so, they fought it, and it's on a trial basis, so it's not a permanent rule yet. But I think they see the way the wind's blowing, and it's going to be hard to kind of get, to reverse course once we've kind of gone down that road.
What else are you working on this spring, summer? You've been in the locker room all the time on Tuesdays for the off-season workouts. Anything you're working on?
Yeah, trying to get to know the rookies. Always fun to kind of look through their backgrounds and do different stories. Wrote a little bit about Battle recently, being on the field with Joe Burrow in that 2019 game. What were his impressions? he said it was the loudest he's ever atmosphere wise. So I thought that was interesting. He was just a freshman and he played in a lot of big games. But all these rookies are sort of interesting. Miles Murphy is obviously an interesting sort of mature kid. So learn about them, writing about them, and just doing getting ready for the season, gathering stuff for training camp.
Okay, I'm going to give you a little plug here. What is the Who Debate?
Oh, me and Andrew are doing that, going back and forth, sort of like a written, some people don't like listening. And I know hate that as we're doing a podcast, but for people that just like reading the traditional stories, a way to kind of get that podcast flavor in a written debate. We take, just take different subjects. Not that you shouldn't listen to a podcast, and this one is very good. But
thank you, Mike.
But
I'll have you back.
Something a little different, to break up the off season.
That's good. Yeah, I think everybody right now is waiting on the Joe Burrow deal to get done. And until that happens, then we'll get a better situation, get a better feel for what the situation is going to be going forward for two of the other stars. Obviously Logan Wilson and T. Higgins. And anything, by the way, stick out to you about the schedule that the Bengals were assigned this year?
Really easy start, I thought. That they could really set themselves up with the back, after that back-to-back divisionals games, where they got 4 games where it's just like they could just roll through that section of the schedule, and get to October.
I think
Arizona, Los Angeles before the Seattle game. You got like Arizona, Los Angeles. Who I think
so they have at Cleveland and home to Baltimore. They haven't started with 2 divisional teams in the Zach Taylor era, so that'll be a first for Zach Taylor. But then they have the Rams on a Monday night at home, at Tennessee, at Arizona, home to Seattle. The Tennessee game is that's Tennessee, always a hard.
But Tennessee's going to be really bad this year.
Yeah, I think they will be too. I mean, they're.
I think those are 3 because they had to cut a lot of money salary wise. I think Tennessee, Arizona, and Rams could be 3 of the worst teams in the league this year.
Yeah, I don't think they should have more than 1 loss heading into the bye. And then at San Francisco, home to Buffalo, home to Houston, and at Baltimore. We'll find out a lot about the 2023 Bengals when they get through that middle portion of the schedule.
Well, I mean, almost like they don't travel very much the last couple of years, and so it's like that trip to San Francisco could be, they got to be ready for it. It could be different because it's like.
I'm looking forward to going out west, by the way, twice at San Francisco. I've been there once for Super Bowl 50. Yeah. I enjoyed Levi's Stadium quite a bit. It's unique. It's open air. Anybody who's been out there knows it's not like a traditional conventional stadium. And then Arizona is always great. I love bring the sticks, Mike. Do you golf?
No,
but I golf.
I do, but I mean, like I haven't in a couple of years. It's I couldn't go on a professional course and not embarrass myself, so I can't.
I don't think you would embarrass yourself at any endeavor you undertake.
I would definitely.
Well, I appreciate you joining me, Mike. Want to wish you the best for the holiday weekend coming up. Any barbecue plans?
No, just we got the kids are going to be amped up. It's the first weekend of summer, so we'll just let them figure out what we're going to do.
All right. He is Mike Niziolek. He does a tremendous job covering the Bengals and the National Football League for Cleveland.com. Be sure to follow him there. Follow him on Twitter as well. Your Twitter handle again, I don't want to get it wrong.
At Michael Niziolek.
There you go. Michael Niziolek on Twitter. You can follow me on Twitter at Trags, TRAGS. I want to thank everybody for downloading this episode of the JungleRoar podcast. We'll talk to you next week.